It's strange, isn't it? How the people who share your blood can hide the sharpest knives behind the warmest smiles. The night the betrayal began was perfect, almost too perfect. Above the dark waters of Avalon Bay, the Tide Dome, a floating glass restaurant anchored between solar lilies, glittered like a starship on the ocean. Gentle classical music hummed beneath the sound of waves hitting the structure. The waitstaff moved like dancers, carrying trays that reflected the chandeliers like constellations. Celeste Valen, 67, stood by the panoramic window. She had built cities that floated, towers that bent with storms, and foundations that withstood rising tides. And now she had sold it all, her life's work, for $82 million. Tonight was meant to be a celebration, not of endings, but of beginnings. The Tide Haven Schools project, her dream of giving abandoned children a future among the tides, was about to become real. Across the candle-lit table sat her only daughter, Marina, radiant in a silver sheath dress, her smile glittering as sharply as the crystals above them. Beside her, Lucien Vale, her husband, wore his usual charm like armor, polished, practiced, hollow. "To you, Mama." Marina lifted her glass, voice soft but eyes sharp. "To your brilliance, and to what comes next." Celeste chuckled, raising her own glass, sea kelp juice, a doctor's order after her heart incident last year. She never drank alcohol anymore. Lucien leaned in, flashing that grin that always made her uneasy. "You deserve to rest, Celeste. You've worked hard enough for 2 lifetimes." For a moment, Celeste let herself believe it. The light, the music, the elegant couple before her, her daughter, her family. Everything she had built was supposed to protect them, not destroy them. Then her wristband buzzed. Quinn Rocha, her lawyer and oldest friend. She excused herself, stepping into the quieter observation deck to take the encrypted call. Back at the table, Marina's smile stiffened into something else, something colder. She reached into her clutch. A small silver vial slipped between her fingers. Lucien glanced around the room. No one was watching, or so he thought. Elio Tran, a young server polishing cutlery at the neighboring table, froze mid-motion. He saw Marina's hand hover over Celeste's untouched glass. He saw the white powder swirl into the green juice like mist vanishing in water. Marina swirled the glass gently, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. By the time Celeste returned, Marina was all warmth again, talking about childhood memories of summers on the floating docks. Celeste smiled, listening. But then, as she lifted her glass, she noticed it. A faint shimmer at the bottom, barely visible. But she had spent a lifetime studying structural anomalies in water systems. Her instinct kicked in before her brain did. "Too sweet," she said casually, setting the glass down and waving to a waiter for a fresh one. Marina's laugh came half a second too late. Lucien's jaw tightened just enough for Elio to catch it. Outside, the tide was rising. Inside, a silent clock had begun to count down. The night air outside Tide Dome was cool and salty, the moonlight painting silver lines across the water. Celeste slipped into the back seat of her autonomous car, still half lost in thoughts about Marina's odd smile and the glint at the bottom of that glass. She was just about to activate the autopilot when, tap, tap, a soft knock on the passenger side window. Standing there was Elio Tran, the young waiter from earlier. His crisp uniform was slightly wrinkled now, his face pale under the soft glow of the dock lights. He glanced around nervously, then leaned closer to the glass. "Mrs. Valen," he whispered. "Don't drink your juice." Celeste's hand froze on the dashboard. She lowered the window slowly. "What did you say?" "I saw her," he said, his voice shaking. "Your daughter. She poured something into your glass while you were gone, a white powder. He glanced back toward the restaurant, kept lookout. For a moment, the sound of the waves drowned everything else. Celeste stared at him, trying to make sense of the words. Her heart was suddenly louder than the ocean. "Are you sure?" she asked. Leo's gaze was steady now. "I've worked here 7 years. I've never interfered with guests, but I couldn't stay quiet about this." From his apron, he pulled out a sealed lab pouch. Inside was her original glass, intact, carefully stored. "I swapped it out when no one was looking," he said. "I thought you'd want proof." Celeste took the pouch with trembling hands. Her reflection stared back at her from the plastic, calm on the outside, but inside, a cold storm was forming. In one moment, everything she thought she knew about her child shattered like glass. The next morning, before the sun rose over Avalon's glittering towers, Celeste walked alone through a quiet corridor beneath the city, the kind of place where secrets stayed buried. A private biomedical lab, no questions asked if you had enough cash. She placed the pouch on the counter in front of a technician. "Full analysis, priority, no record in the public net. You'll be well compensated." Hours later, as dawn broke over the bay, she received the report. Cardiotonin beta, a controlled cardiovascular agent. Lethal to someone with pre-existing heart issues. Tasteless, fast, undetectable in routine post-mortem scans. It was the kind of poison you'd use on someone you wanted to kill quietly. Like a parent who just came into $82 million. Back in her high-rise apartment, Celeste stood by the window, holding the report. The city below hummed with the usual rhythm, hovercrafts gliding, marketplaces opening, children heading to floating schools. Life continued, oblivious, but inside her something had shifted. She called Quinn Rocha. He picked up before the first ring ended. "You were right," she said. Silence on the line, then Quinn's voice low and sharp. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," she replied. "They're going to try again." "Then, Celeste, what do you want to do?" She looked down at the lab report, at her daughter's handwriting on last night's dinner invitation, at the photo of Marina as a little girl, smiling under the summer sun on the floating docks. Then she closed the folder. Her voice was ice. "I want them to feel every ounce of what they just served me, but not through handcuffs, through consequences." Outside, the tide began to swell. Inside, the architect had begun to draw her revenge. The morning sky over Avalon Bay was sharp and cold, as if the city itself had held its breath. In Quinn Rocha's office, a fortress of glass and oak perched on the 58th floor, every detail had been arranged with deliberate precision. 2 chairs faced each other across a long table. A recording device blinked silently in the corner. A manila folder lay closed in front of Celeste, heavy not because of its weight, but because of what it contained. Marina and Lucian arrived exactly on time, dressed like they were stepping into a press conference. She wore a light blue dress, the kind designed to disarm. He wore a dark suit, crisp and calculated. They looked like a couple about to negotiate a deal, not like 2 people walking into the jaws of their own trap. "Mother," Marina said softly as she stepped forward with open arms. Celeste leaned back ever so slightly, and the hug never happened. A flicker of confusion crossed her daughter's face before she recovered, pulling out a chair for her instead. "Are you feeling better?" Marina asked, her voice carefully shaped. "Much better," Celeste replied, sitting down. "It's amazing what a good night's sleep can do." Lucian flashed his politician's smile. "We were worried, Celeste." "I bet you were," Celeste thought. She didn't say it, not yet. Quinn cleared her throat, her tone professional. "Thank you both for coming." Celeste wanted this meeting to clarify the new financial structure following the sale. At the mention of financial, Marina's eyes lit up almost imperceptibly. Lucian straightened his posture. "As you know," Quinn continued, "Celeste initially planned to allocate the majority of the funds to the Tide Haven Schools project. However, after recent reflections, there's been a change of plans." "Really?" Marina leaned forward, hope glittering in her voice. "Yes," Celeste said calmly. When you come close to death, your priorities become very clear. For a heartbeat, neither Marina nor Lucian breathed. Then Celeste opened the manila folder, took out the lab report, and slid it across the table toward them. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. Marina didn't touch it. Lucian's fingers twitched but stayed still. "It's a toxicology report," Celeste continued. "From my drink last night." The silence thickened like wet cement. "Cardiotin beta," Quinn said matter-of-factly. "A lethal dose for someone with Celeste's heart condition. Tasteless, undetectable, a tidy way to inherit a fortune." The blood drained from Marina's face. Lucian's forehead began to glisten with sweat. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about," Marina stammered, her voice trembling at the edges. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" Celeste tilted her head slightly. "A joke? No, Marina, this is not a joke. Neither is the fact that a Leo Tran, remember him, the waiter, saw you pour something into my glass while Lucian played lookout." The air snapped. Marina stopped pretending to cry. Her face went still, not fearful, not apologetic, calculating. Lucian finally spoke. "You're accusing us of attempted murder based on a waiter's word and a lab test. Both can be faked." "That's why," Quinn said, smiling without warmth, "we invited someone else." She pressed a button. The door opened. Charles Lennox entered, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a simple gray suit, former federal investigator. He sat down beside Quinn, placed a folder on the table, and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who has already dug up the bodies. "In the last 48 hours, he said, "I traced multiple online searches made from Lucian's devices about cardiotin toxicity in patients with heart conditions. We also confirmed that Marina purchased the compound under a fake name at a pharmacy in South Dock District. Surveillance footage confirms it's her." Lucian's composure cracked. His hands trembled. Marina stared at the table like it might swallow her. Celeste's voice softened, but it was the softness of a blade sliding through silk. "Why, Marina? How did we get here? How did the girl I raised turn into someone who thought killing me was easier than asking for help?" Marina finally met her eyes, and what Celeste saw wasn't regret, it was ice. "You want to know why?" she said, her voice eerily calm. "Because you always cared more about your precious projects than about me. You built empires while I waited in the shadows, and now you want to give everything away to strangers. You promised me, Mother. You said one day it would all be mine." Lucian hissed under his breath, "Marina, stop." But she didn't. "I deserve it," she continued. "All of it. I was supposed to inherit the world you built. And if you won't give it to me, then I'll take it." For a moment, Celeste's heart clenched, not from fear, but from something worse, recognition. The girl across from her wasn't a stranger. She was the same child who once built sand castles beside her on the floating docks, eyes full of wonder. But somewhere along the line, that wonder had hardened into entitlement. Celeste leaned forward. Her voice was low, steady, terrifying in its clarity. "You have two options," she said. "Option 1, Quinn calls the authorities right now. We press charges for attempted murder. The evidence is overwhelming. You'll both spend years behind bars." Marina swallowed but said nothing. "Option 2, Celeste continued. You sign the documents Quinn has prepared. You confess everything in writing. That confession will be sealed in a safe. If anything happens to me, anything, the authorities receive it immediately. In exchange, you disappear from my life forever. No contact, no inheritance, no second chances." Quinn slid the thick legal folder across the table. Lucian's voice cracked. "And the money? What about it?" Celeste said. "Most of it will fund Tide Haven as planned, but I'll settle your debts every cent so you don't drag loan sharks to my door. After that, you leave for good." Marina stared at the papers. Her pride fought her panic. In the end, panic won. She grabbed the pen, muttering, "We don't have a choice." One signature after another, a future burning quietly on the page. When they finished, Quinn collected the documents without ceremony. Charles stood ready to escort them out. Celeste didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply said, "Goodbye, Marina." And in that moment, Marina finally looked like she understood. This wasn't her mother's defeat. It was her reckoning. Outside, the tide struck the seawall with a booming force, as if echoing the moment inside. The storm had officially turned. Time has a way of settling even the fiercest storms. Months passed since that morning in Quinn's office. Avalon Bay continued its rhythm. Tides rose and fell, cities floated forward, and life, indifferent, moved on. Celeste Valen adjusted to her new routine with an unexpected stillness. Without Marina's shadow, her days became quieter but sharper. She poured herself into the Tide Haven Foundation. Plans that had once been sketches on blueprints were becoming real structures, floating campuses anchored like luminous petals across the bay. Her life narrowed to essentials: early morning walks, board meetings with engineers, legal consultations, and long, silent evenings on her balcony. She was not lonely, but there was a hollow space inside her, an unspoken grief for the daughter she had lost, not to death, but to greed. Then, on an ordinary afternoon, a message arrived from Quinn Racha. Subject, meeting request Aurora Liang. Body, medical research partnership proposal. Promising you'll want to hear her out. Celeste almost ignored it. Partnerships came in weekly. Most were opportunistic, but Quinn's tone was different, measured, almost cautious. The next morning, Celeste entered the biomedical research wing of Avalon University. It was all glass and steel, humming with the sterile energy of ambition. She expected a researcher in their 40s, perhaps 50s. Instead, waiting at the entrance was a young woman, no older than 25, with a white lab coat, dark hair tied back, and eyes bright with focus. "Mrs. Valen," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Aurora Liang. Thank you for meeting me." Celeste shook her hand. There was something disarming in the young woman's confidence, not arrogance, but purpose. Aurora led her through the lab, explaining her project with contagious energy. "We're working on regenerative heart tissue," she said, "using stem cells to repair damaged cardiac muscle. The goal is to treat chronic heart conditions without transplants. It's early, but the results are promising." They passed a sealed room where a synthetic heart beat steadily on a table. Celeste paused, unexpectedly moved. Aurora continued, unaware of the chord she'd struck. "We need funding to expand to clinical trials. About $600,000 for the first year. I know your foundation focuses on education and infrastructure, but this could save lives." Celeste studied her for a long moment. There was a strange familiarity in the way Aurora tilted her head, in the way her words carried both fire and restraint. Over coffee in Aurora's small office, Celeste asked the question that had been nagging her. "Why my foundation? There are other investors, bigger pharmaceutical partners." Aurora hesitated, then reached into her desk and pulled out a small, weathered photograph. She slid it across the table. It was a picture of a teenage girl, Marina, standing on a floating dock, sunlight in her hair, eyes full of mischief. "My biological mother," Aurora said softly. "She was 17 when she had me. She gave me up for adoption." The world seemed to tilt. Celeste stared at the photograph as if it were a ghost. "I found out 2 years ago," Aurora continued. "I wasn't looking for her at first. I had a good life. But when I started medical school, I wanted to know my family history. That search led me to her and eventually to you." Celeste's mouth was dry. She never told me. Aurora shook her head. "I found her in Portugal. I tried to meet her 3 months ago. She refused, said that part of her life was over." The words hit Celeste like a physical blow, not just Marina's rejection of her granddaughter, but the fact that Marina had hidden Aurora's existence all these years. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Aurora added quickly. "I'm not looking for inheritance or recognition. I just thought if you were willing, I'd like to know you, and maybe together we could do something meaningful." Celeste looked at the young woman before her, the granddaughter she never knew existed. Bright, determined, compassionate, so different from the woman who had tried to poison her. Something inside her, long frozen, cracked. She reached across the table and took Aurora's hand. "I would like that," Celeste said quietly. "Very much." Aurora's smile was hesitant but real, and for the first time in months, Celeste felt something stir in the hollow space inside her. Not revenge, not bitterness, but possibility. Outside, the tide shifted direction, pulling gently toward the open sea. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Celeste felt it. Her story was no longer just about what she'd lost. It was about who she'd found. The spring sun spilled gold over Avalon Bay, warming the newly finished platforms of Tide Haven Campus 1. Where there had once been only blueprints and holograms, there were now classrooms, gardens, and dormitories suspended gracefully on the water. Children ran barefoot along the decking, their laughter carrying over the gentle hum of the turbines below. Celeste Valen stood on the upper terrace, her silver hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, a lightweight linen coat wrapped around her shoulders. She watched the tide lap softly against the floating barriers and exhaled. For the first time in years, she wasn't scanning for cracks, flaws, or betrayals. She was simply present. Beside her, Aurora Liang flipped through a stack of progress reports. Her regenerative cardiac research had reached preliminary clinical success. The Foundation's investment had pushed the project forward months ahead of schedule, and the first patients were responding better than anyone dared hope. "They approved the next phase," Aurora said, barely able to contain her smile. "We start full clinical trials in 6 weeks." Celeste turned to her, pride softening her face. "David would have loved this," she said quietly. "He always believed the future belonged to those who dared to build it." Aurora grinned. "Then let's make sure it's worth inheriting." Their bond had grown naturally, almost shyly. Weekly strategy meetings turned into shared lunches. Shared lunches turned into evenings spent discussing ethics, legacy, and the things neither of them had been able to say to their mothers. There were no declarations, no dramatic embraces. Just steady trust, brick by brick, tide by tide. One afternoon, as Celeste was reviewing the final operating budget in her office, her security liaison buzzed through. "There's someone at the outer gate asking to see you," he said. "She won't give her name, but she says she's family." Celeste's pen paused mid-signature. She knew before he said it. Marina. She walked slowly down the long pier leading to the outer gate, the afternoon sun low behind her. And there Marina stood. No designer dress, no carefully constructed facade. Just a plain coat, scuffed shoes, and a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She looked smaller than Celeste remembered, like time itself had sanded down her edges. They stood on opposite sides of the transparent gate, the water swirling beneath them. For a long time, neither spoke. "I heard," Marina finally said. Her voice was rougher now. "About the Foundation, about her." She didn't say Aurora's name. Celeste's face was unreadable. "Yes. I'm not here to ask for anything," Marina added quickly. "I just wanted to see it, to see what you built." She glanced past Celeste at the campus, the gardens, the classrooms, the children chasing each other along the docks. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Celeste didn't open the gate. She didn't accuse, didn't forgive. She simply nodded. "It is." There was a pause, long, fragile. Marina's eyes filled but didn't spill. She turned away before the moment could fracture further. She didn't look back. As Celeste watched her walk down the dock toward the waiting ferry, she felt a curious calm. There was no triumphant satisfaction, no aching regret, just truth. Not every wound needs to end with confrontation. Some simply stop bleeding. Weeks later, Aurora joined Celeste on the terrace for their evening tea. The campus glowed beneath the dusk sky, lanterns reflecting across the water. "Do you ever regret not going to the police?" Aurora asked softly. Celeste considered it. No, jail would have been too clean. What they carry now, what they lost, that's their sentence. Aurora nodded, understanding. Celeste turned to her, her expression softening. The tide's turning, Aurora, I can feel it. Aurora smiled. Then let's turn with it. Below them, the water surged gently, as if agreeing. Celeste looked out toward the horizon, no longer seeing betrayal, but the world she was still building, one tide at a time. 3 years later, Avalon Bay had changed in quiet, astonishing ways. The floating campuses of Tide Haven stretched far beyond their original boundaries, connected by sleek glass walkways and solar bridges that shimmered like threads of light across the water. Children's laughter mixed with the hum of turbines and seabirds calling overhead, a living symphony of future and resilience. Celeste Valen walked slowly along the upper observation deck of Campus 1, her steps measured but steady. Age had softened her edges further. Her hair was fully silver now, her hands thinner, but her gaze remained sharp, anchored like the foundations she'd built. She paused at the railing, overlooking the tide gardens below, where dozens of children were planting mangrove saplings. The same hands that once drafted floating city blueprints now held a cup of jasmine tea, warm against the cool breeze. Beside her, Aurora Liang leaned against the railing, tablet in hand. She was 28 now, no longer the eager researcher who had walked Celeste through a lab. She had become one of Avalon's most respected medical innovators. Her regenerative heart program had saved lives across 3 continents. Her name was spoken with admiration, the way Celeste's had been decades earlier. They approved the international partnership this morning, Aurora said, eyes shining. We're expanding to the Pacific network. The first Tide Haven clinics will open next year. Celeste smiled softly. I knew they'd see what you built. What we built, Aurora corrected. They shared a quiet laugh. It wasn't the loud, giddy kind. It was the gentle laughter of 2 people who had weathered storms together and found a rhythm that didn't need words. Occasionally, news about Marina trickled in through Quinn or Charles. She was living quietly in southern Portugal, working at a coastal inn. There were no lawsuits, no schemes, no grand reconciliations. She existed at the edges of Celeste's life like a faded photograph, untouched, but no longer painful. One spring morning, Celeste received a letter, no return address. Inside was a simple line, written in Marina's familiar looping handwriting. I saw her on the global broadcast. She looks like you. No apology, no signature. But for Celeste, it was enough. A wound doesn't always close with words. Sometimes it just stops aching. On a golden April evening, the Tide Haven Children's Home held its annual celebration. Lanterns floated across the water as children performed songs they'd written themselves. Aurora stood on stage, announcing a new scholarship fund named after David Valen. The man who had dreamed of giving back long before his time was cut short. From her seat in the front row, Celeste watched with quiet pride as Aurora's voice carried across the bay. She wasn't just witnessing a legacy. She was watching it grow beyond her. Later, when the festivities faded and the guests had gone, Celeste and Aurora climbed to the rooftop deck. They stood side by side, watching the last lantern drift toward the open sea. Aurora slipped her arm through Celeste's. Do you ever miss it? The fight, the chaos? Celeste chuckled softly. I don't miss the chaos, but I'm grateful for what it revealed. Aurora looked at her. What did it reveal? Celeste's eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sky met the water in a perfect line. That legacy isn't about blood or money or buildings. It's about what survives after the storms. And sometimes it's about who finds you when you've stopped looking. The tide below shifted gently, a quiet, rhythmic pull toward the horizon. The camera of memory would pull back here, 2 figures silhouetted against the ocean dusk, generations apart but bound by choice, not circumstance. Celeste exhaled, slow and steady, the way one does when the fight has ended and peace has taken root. Her story had begun with poison in a glass. It ended with the tide, not roaring, just steady, endless, and free.